going to keep going with the throwback theme a little bit, which you'd only really know that I've got a theme going if you're watching these sequentially or watching them at all for that matter. I've got a size 14 nymph hook in my vise here. I'm using some 14-aught sheer olive thread. Usually I'm going to tie this smaller. This is going to be what's called a Swimming Mayfly, and it's a pattern from Mike Lawson, who wrote some of the books that I used when I first started tying flies to learn how to tie flies. Didn't have videos back in the day. We had VHS, but this is one of those patterns from Mike Lawson for Western Rivers fishing, and we're going to tie it the way that Mike tied it, or at least the way that I saw Mike tie it on the video, and we're going to give it a shot. I'm going to start just grabbing a nice ostrich plume here, and I'm going to grab one ostrich herl here. This is going to be the gills on our Swimming Mayfly. I'm going to clip off the tip, and then we're just going to tie this right in on the shank of the hook here. Draw that back a little bit. Got that in place. The other material we're going to tie in right here is going to be a piece of copper wire. This is going to be on a 14. I'm using this small size copper wire. I'm just going to draw it backwards so I don't have to cut it off. Get that in here nice and secure. I'm just going to let my thread travel back to where I want the abdomen on this fly to start. Right about in this vicinity there. For this pattern, we're going to use a dubbing loop with our, just to reinforce that peacock herl a little bit. I'm just going to toss my thread here over the shank of the hook and let it go over the top a few times to kind of secure that base. Then I can just take my thread backwards, again, back to where I want the abdomen to start. My dubbing loop is over here. It's independent now. I'm just going to go ahead and move that up near towards the front. So I'm going to go ahead and take my dubbing loop here, and I'm going to open it up. And we are going to try to get our peacock herl kind of trapped right in the middle of that dubbing loop as best as we can. And once I've got that kind of going, I'm going to just spin my dubbing loop, and you can see it's making a nice dubbing rope here. And this is going to be the gills on this fly. These are a free swimming mayfly. It's not one that necessarily is going to be crawling along the bottom. They have gills, and that's what we're mimicking here. Using this olive thread, I'm not too worried about these turns being touching, because I don't mind some of this olive showing through the kind of cream colored peacock herl, or ostrich herl. Who knows what I've been calling it, but it is an ostrich herl. I'm going to take that right to about there. I'm going to take my thread off of my bobbin cradle. We're going to go ahead and secure that down now with a couple of thread wraps over the top of it. Take a thread wrap or two in front of it. And then I can come in with my scissors and go ahead and cut that dubbing loop and my ostrich herl away. That's a really handy way of using, I love using ostrich herl, and it's very delicate. So by putting it in a dubbing loop like that, it helps reinforce it, and it's less likely to break. So on this pattern, we're actually going to put the tails on at this point, which is contrary to how I usually tie. Usually I'll have the tails coming on at the very beginning of the fly, but not in this case. In this case, we're going to put them on right here. It just got them kind of lined, the tips lined up about where I want them. And I don't want this tail to be too long here. So I'm going to take a look from the top of my hook, and I'm going to maybe half of the hook shank length, or maybe even a little bit less than that. I'm going to pinch those pheasant tail fibers on the top of my hook here. That's where I want them to stay. I want them to be right on the top of our hook shank here. Just like that. And now, because I tied my copper wire in, I'm going to go ahead and start moving up the shank of the hook, and I'm going to lay those pheasant tail fibers down right across the top of the hook shank, and we're actually going to use this copper wire to hold our pheasant tail where we want it to be held. Now that I've got that copper up near the front here, I've got my pheasant tail sticking out the back. Go ahead and rotate that piece of copper wire off. I can also sneak in here now and cut off the excess of this pheasant tail with my scissors. So now is a really good time, if you've got one, to use a little pick of sorts to try to tease out a few more of these ostrich fibers here that may have gotten trapped, just to make it look a little bit more buggy. So once I have my appropriate level of bugginess on this, I'm going to go ahead and turn this upside down. The gills on a swimming mayfly are going to be just on the sides. So we're going to just give this a little bit of a haircut on the bottom, so that these gills are a little bit more exaggerated on the sides, rather than having any on the bottom at all. And I might trim a few of the longer ones out here, back here by the tail, to make that tail stand out a little bit more. Okay, we're going to finish this fella up. We're going to tie in a wing case. For the wing case, I'm just going to use some mylar pearl tinsel here. Let's go ahead and just tie that onto the top of our hook shank here. Get a couple of good wraps on it, and then I'll probably just draw it backwards. Stuff tends to be pretty slippery, so that shouldn't be too difficult to do. Go ahead and secure that the rest of the way down, and then I'm going to take a look top down just to make sure that I've got that fairly well centered over the top of my hook shank, and I do. And so from here I'm going to just finger dub. In this case, I'm going to use some Awesome Possum. I want something that's kind of pokey, something that, you know, has a little bit of dimension to it. And I'm going to use a mix of some of the darker brown and some of the creamier color. So this is going to be a really light colored fly. So once I've got kind of the darker and the lighter, and you probably can't even tell the difference between the two, I'm just going to kind of separate that, mix it together a little bit in my fingers here before I dub this onto the thread here. Just wet my fingers a little bit. I'm just going to start my dubbing here, and I'm not going to dub it really tight because I do want this front end to be buggy looking. So that's good enough for me. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to build ourselves a nice thorax here. Looking a lot like a hare's ear. And once I'm up at the front, I'm just going to pull that material backwards a little bit to try to get a little bit cleaner head on here. Take a couple of thread wraps. I'm going to take my piece of mylar and I'm going to pull this up over the top here. I'm going to capture that right over the center. I'll take a few thread wraps over the top of it. I'm going to kind of pull it back a little bit, and I'm going to take a few thread wraps right on the hook, right behind the eye here. With that, I'm going to sneak in here with my scissors one last time, and we're going to go ahead and cut this piece of mylar off as close as we can. Set that aside to use it for another fly. And I'll just take some final wraps here just to build a little bit of a head, not much. cover up that mylar that we just cut off. Give myself a little bit of extra thread. We'll grab our whip finisher. Pull that nice and tight. Turn my whip finisher the other way and grab the thread cutting portion of it. Cut the thread off there. And there you have it. It's an old school pattern. The Swimming Mayfly works great on the western waters here, in America anyway. Give it a shot.